Hey everybody, welcome to class. Well, in a few minutes we'll start class, but welcome to the early arrival part of the class, and in about 5 minutes we'll jump right into our meeting. So thanks for your attendance. Hey there, Gary. Thank you. Hi, Rachel. And everyone else, feel free to say hi over there in the chat. Always appreciate that. Hi, Cameron. Hello, everyone else. How's it going, Gabe, Annika? Good to see you guys. Hey, we do it. Awesome. Hey, Sophia. You're doing well. Hello, hello. One second, be right back. Raspberry cranberry. It's a pretty good flavor. Okay, 2 more minutes and then we'll get it going. Hey, Alexandra. Good to see you. Ooh, let's put the screen a little bit here. Oh, LaCroix? Yeah. I'll take a sponsorship from LaCroix. It's pretty good stuff. Okay, another minute. Hey, Ricardo. Good to see you there. All right, everybody, welcome back. It's 5:30, so welcome to class, and I'm just going to get us started. Thanks, everyone, for your time and your attention tonight. So yeah, like we just are going to continue to finish up some more of our notes on the theory of utilitarianism that we began on Tuesday. So I have to talk to you guys about the objections to utilitarianism, and then if that doesn't take too much time, then I'll try to go over at least some of the information from the work of J.C. Smart extreme and restricted utilitarianism. Thanks, Ronald, for that. Not to worry, but I hope you're feeling okay. If you have a cavity or a root canal or something, but hopefully nothing too bad. And Eddie's trying to make a cameo. Okay, so let me just kind of bring you guys back up to speed with what we had discussed last time, and then that'll allow us to continue with some more notes on utilitarian ethics. So we've reached the second major topic of the course, which is ethics. Ethics, as you guys now know, is all about morality. It's the theoretical study of morality and moral concepts. So whenever we think of concepts or ideas like right and wrong, good and bad, moral and immoral, just and unjust, how a person should act as opposed to how they should not act, these are all within the realm of morality and ethics. There are three major kinds of action within ethics. There are actions that are morally impermissible, there are actions that are morally permissible, and then there are actions that are morally obligatory. And we all talked about examples of all three kinds. So when an act is morally impermissible, it just means that it's wrong and it's not okay to do. And when an action is morally permissible, it means that it's not wrong and it is okay to do. And if an act is morally obligatory, this means that you must do it and it's wrong to not do it. Impermissible acts, killing people, lying, stealing, cheating. Morally permissible acts, I don't know, watching a lecture, petting a cat, going to college, whatever, walking down the street, just generally a lot of things. And then morally obligatory acts, those would be things that you must do and it would be wrong not to do them. Paying for food that you already ate, keeping a promise, and of course not performing any of the morally impermissible acts. So when you look at an ethical theory, it tries to provide guidance and criteria according to which we can classify actions into those different groups or categories. The first main ethical theory that we're looking at is the utilitarian ethics of John Stuart Mill. So as I told you guys, John Stuart Mill was this British philosopher of the 19th century, and he wrote a lot of interesting stuff, but we learned about his work in the theory of utilitarianism. So what's the main idea of utilitarian ethics? It says that you should always act in what type of way? Who remembers that? Let me know in the chat. What are we supposed to do if we want to be a good utilitarian? Then you're supposed to always, morally speaking, how should you act? The theory claims that the right action, the morally obligatory action, is which one? It's whichever one that does what. Well, you'll put it however you want to put it, but what do you think? What's the core idea of utilitarianism? Create the most happiness. Good, Brooklyn. So your moral obligation, they say, is to take the action that will produce the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. Okay, so you look at your options and you ask yourself, which one of these things, if I were to do it, would be the one that would create the most happiness overall? Whichever one of those actions that it is, that's the one that's morally my obligation, and otherwise it's wrong. Now, the theory is supposed to be predicated on a couple of principles. One is the greatest happiness principle. Greatest happiness principle says that actions are right to the degree that they promote happiness, and actions are wrong to the degree that they promote the reverse. Happiness there is understood as pleasure in the absence of pain, and the reverse of happiness is, as you could guess, pain and the absence of pleasure. So he says, basically, you're supposed to be trying to promote the maximum overall yield of pleasure minus pain with each act that you perform. And he thinks that this is something that will strike us as reasonable because if you think about it, he argues that in each one of our lives, all that we're pursuing is happiness. The way he puts it is that happiness or pleasure is the only thing that each of us pursues as an end and not as a means. So in other words, everything that you do, even what you're doing right now, the only reason you do anything, the only reason you have a motive to do anything is because you think that it's somehow either directly or indirectly, either in the near term or in the long term, going to lead to some pleasure and happiness for you. And since everything we seek is based on the pursuit of happiness, why not make more happiness rather than less for all affected by your actions? Okay, so I then tried to kind of talk you guys through an actual choice situation, and we had a little fun with that, just putting the whole pizza topping example on the board. In that case, we just tried to diagram how a choice situation would be made based on this theory. You would first of all determine what the various preferences are of all the people affected by an act, and how much total happiness would be provided by the options that you have. Then you try to estimate which one of the options available to you would lead to the greatest total amount of happiness. And if that's you know, whichever act it is, then that's the moral obligation. In our case, we went through a case of like assigning pleasure scores, happiness scores to various types of pizza options, and we saw that one of them was the one that was optimific within the group of students that we were surveying. Okay, and if I can remember correctly, I think that's pretty much where we did end, right? We just went through the theory, we showed that example. Doesn't that ring a bell? And that's in your memory, yeah? So I guess from here, then we will just go over the objections. That's the next main point to raise when we study this theory. The last lesson was kind of giving you the theory itself and trying to explain its underlying rationale and how it could be executed in specific cases. But now we want to learn about the objections to it, which are important. So for now, it's all about objections to utilitarianism. Objections to utilitarianism. What are objections? So objections are simply counter arguments or reasons to disagree with something. As we studied philosophy of religion, you guys now know that we looked at objections to the different arguments that were given. You know, Ganilo, Moore, Rowe, they all had objections for Anselm's argument. Ernest Nagel, he had objections to the cosmological argument, the design argument. So in every case of an argument that's presented, no matter how good or clever it is, there's going to be some number of philosophical objections. Let's then learn what are the pushback, the critique, the clapback, whatever, against utilitarian ethics. What is someone going to say to try and, you know, refute or discredit the theory? Okay, so one objection that's mentioned by Mill himself in the writing that we have is what he calls a theory fit for swine. So let me give you the label or the name of the objection, and then I'll talk you through it. So one objection, we can call it this: a theory fit for swine. Okay, now that is just a phrase, but let's dig in. What is a swine, actually? Like literally, a swine. What type of thing? What is that? The word that. Sure, some do. Swine? Swine? It's a pig, correct. So what Mill says, now keep the dialogue in mind. Mill is in favor of utilitarianism. So these objections, it's not like he believes in the objections. He's trying to defend against the objections. What he's doing here is he's presenting what his critics say so that he can try and rebut the objections. Okay, so it's like point, counterpoint, and rebuttal. We heard the theory of utilitarianism and its rationale behind it. Now, Mill will present the objection, and then he'll try to give a reason why the objection doesn't really destroy his theory or undermine it that bad. But I don't want anybody to like think that Mill thinks it's a theory for swine. So he portrays or characterizes his critic as saying this. Now, thinking about pigs, okay? Why do you think anybody would say this is a theory fit for so-called swine? What is it about the theory and what it says that has any relevance to the concept of a pig or a swine? What is your guess? Just asking you for a guess, if you even have a ballpark guess. Why do you figure maybe someone would claim this is a theory fit for swine? What is it about it that leads to that kind of reaction? What could it be? Why? Why does someone think it's a theory fit for swine? According to maybe just you, and I mean, I will explain it. Okay, so Ronald, you're saying selfish? Kind of, yeah. At Brooklyn, you have a similar thought. Red Panda, it would be like mean. Well, why though? Why would it be mean? I don't necessarily disagree, but I'd like to see if you have another reason as you can expand on that. Ricardo, you say undermines. A little bit unspecific. Because you don't care about others? Well, actually, to the contrary. Let's clarify. It doesn't say that you don't care about others. In utilitarian theory, you absolutely care about everybody because all you're trying to do is create the most happiness for the greatest number of people. Maybe that didn't come through clearly enough. So I want to quickly, let's get back to the objection in a minute, but here. I'm just going to like make a simple box here with like, let's say there's going to be 3. Okay, so Bill, Ted, Susan, and pepperoni, cheese, vegetarian. Now, okay, so like 30, 40, 60, 75, 35, 45. Okay, so like according to the theory of utilitarianism, in this case you choose cheese, if these boxes stand for the amount of pleasure that each individual receives based on each topping that's optional, if you take the sum of all the pleasure that each one receives from cheese, it adds up to more in total than either of the other two cases. Now, how is this selfish though? Because look, say that you are Susan, right? And you're going to order the pizza. Are you going to get your favorite pizza? No. You're going to get your favorite pizza. Well, you're not going to get your favorite pizza. If you're going to order and you're a utilitarian, Susan, the utilitarian, is ordering this because it would create the most happiness for all affected. It's not hedonism. So let me explain something to you that I hope will make this clearer. Hedonism is a different type of ethical theory. Hedonism is another member of the consequentialist school of thought that utilitarianism is from. It's another theory that says the consequences are what define the morality of the action. But to the hedonist, the only person's pleasure that matters is who do you think? Let me quickly define the term hedonism here. So it says that the right action is whatever produces the most happiness for who? Just for yourself. Okay, so hedonism, the right action is whatever creates most happiness for you. You alone. For you, the individual. But no one else. Now, hedonism is different than utilitarianism. So say that you are Bill, the hedonist. What should you pick? According to the graph and according to the definition of hedonism. Bill, if he's a hedonistic ethical theorist, would say that the right choice is pepperoni. Yeah, why? Give me the reason. I think you know the reason because you gave the right answer. Why is that the right thing to do according to hedonistic ethics for Mr. Bill? Because if you truly didn't want to start out, well, no, Alexandra. Well, hold on, I'll return to your comment in a minute, Alexandra. But all I was asking for is this. It's because it's the one that produces the most pleasure for him. That's his favorite. So he prefers it the most. It gives him the most enjoyment. So that's the thing he should pick if he's Bill the hedonist. But if you're a utilitarian, it does not matter that that's your favorite if you're Bill. The only thing that matters is this total column and what generates the most for all. So Bill, as a utilitarian, placing the phone call to order the pizza is kind of taking one for the team by ordering cheese. Because he doesn't really prefer cheese over pepperoni, but he knows that that's what creates the most total happiness. So let's not confuse hedonism with utilitarianism. I just wanted to have that digression because I saw the comment up there where you suggested, Red Panda, that in case this theory is a theory for swine, it's because you don't care about anybody else. That sounds like hedonism. Utilitarianism asks you to take measure of all people's preferences and act robotically in accordance with whatever generates the most pleasure, even if it's not your favorite. You say the word complying, Guerrero. I mean, you do it because it's right, according to the theory. You want to do the right thing, even if it doesn't always make you the most pleased. So the right thing is what creates the most total happiness for all. And in some other cases, you're going to be the beneficiary of other people's goodwill if they're good utilitarians and they recognize that something that creates more total happiness is in line with your preferences but not theirs. So, I mean, over time, you'd think it would not just be all self-sacrifice because everyone would be a utilitarian mutually. So not like you're taking one for the team and no one else is doing that for you. But anyway, yeah. Never mind hedonism. Hedonism is not taken seriously as a moral theory, though. It's kind of why I wasn't even really going to mention it. Because ethics is supposed to be about how you should act if you're morally enlightened, right? Like what's right and righteous to do and just. But a lot of people would think that hedonism sounds less like that and more like an invitation to just live selfishly and to just ignore everyone else's interests. Look, if these three people are all hedonists, right? How are they going to choose what to order? Because each one has a different favorite. For Susan, her favorite's veggie. For Ted, his favorite's cheese. And for Bill, his favorite's pepperoni. So if these are three hedonists, what should they do? Kill the other two people so you don't have to worry about them and their preferences? Just not have friends and don't do anything collectively? You know, so it's very hard for us to think of a world in which everyone acts according to the hedonistic ethics here. Yeah, it's a funny joke to be that kind of person. But anyway, yes, you understand then the contrasts. So I'm going to erase this, and we're going to go back over into our objection now. Okay, so a theory fit for swine. Swine are pigs because you're doing it robotically following orders like an animal. Not so much that one, but we will get it. We will get it. We'll get it out of us. So why is it that this theory evokes to the mind of some critics thoughts of the behavior of swine? We know what about swine? By the way, animals don't really follow orders. Animals don't understand orders. So that's not, I don't think, the connection. What could it be? What could it be? Theory fit for swine, because it's all about, okay, good, Brooklyn, indulgent. Because people think that are critics, that this theory sounds too much like an invitation to care only about pleasure above all else. And some people focus and zero in on that word pleasure, like pleasure is something that's subhuman. It's like an animalistic thing. Animals, pigs, for example, what do they do all day? They lay around in the mud, they roll around, they kind of eat, sleep, get the warmth from the sun, and they just pursue these animalistic pleasures at the expense of everything else. Now, the critic is basically saying that the theory is telling you to promote the maximum amount of overall pleasure and happiness for the greatest number of people. But the critic is thinking that sounds like you're telling us to live like a pig, because a human being is more dignified than a pig. And to a smart, rational creature like a human, like us, maybe we should have a more important goal behind everything that we do than just trying to pursue pleasure to the maximum extent. Maybe a human being has a greater dignity and purpose than to just pursue base pleasure like a pig would do, you know? So that's the substance of the criticism. You're telling me to pursue pleasure for the maximum amount possible because it is those low animals like pigs and farm animals that can't do anything besides pursue pleasure. But I would have thought we're more important than that and smarter than that, so we should not be following utilitarianism, so says the critic. Do you kind of feel the criticism now? Do you understand it? That's all I'm trying to get you to understand it. So Mill says, create the most amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. It's based on the greatest happiness principle. It's the only thing we pursue as an end is happiness, so let's make that the goal of the theory. Enter the critic. Critic comes in and says, wait a minute though, that sounds like it's for swine. You're telling us to pursue pleasure above everything and that maximizing pleasure is the goal of ethics and that's the way to live morally? But that's what animals like pigs do. So we shouldn't necessarily preoccupy our minds with something as low and animalistic as the pursuit of pleasure. We should have higher pursuits of a more noble and intellectual sort. And that's why he thinks, the critic thinks, this is a bad ethical theory. But now I need to tell you how Mill responds to this. How does Mill try to defend against this criticism? Because that's the next step. Okay, he has a defense ready to go because people made this criticism to his face in his own life. So he was well aware of it and he had some thoughts. Here's what he said, that there's actually a mistake being made by this critic. He says, the critic says my theory is a theory for swine, but that's not true. The problem with the critic is that they just don't understand that there's different types of pleasures. There's pleasures that only animals can enjoy, but there's also pleasures that only us humans can enjoy. And when you see the difference between those two types, you'll understand that when I say we should pursue pleasure, I'm not just talking about the animal kind. Okay, so he distinguishes these two types of pleasures, lower versus higher pleasures. So two types of pleasure now. Okay, so we've got the lower pleasures. I'm going to put on this side of the cross, and over here, higher pleasures on this side. Now, I'll tell you, what are these lower pleasures? We'll start on the left. The lower pleasures are pleasures that non-human animals are capable of experiencing and enjoying. Okay, so pleasures that other life forms that are not humans, like pigs, for example, could enjoy and do enjoy. So let's start by asking some of you guys, what are some sources of pleasure for our animal friends out there in the world? Not talking about humans now. So things that animals can enjoy and find some pleasure in. What do you think could be things like that? Okay, Brooklyn, good. Food, like just eating. That's very clear. Well, it's not just dogs, though, that we're talking about. And it's not just pets either. So when you say pets, like toys and dog treats, I'm talking about all the animals, like in the jungle and everywhere, okay? But fair enough. They probably like activity of some kind. When you give the word toys, I think that there's also some comparison to that in the world of wild animals, because they do seem to play and stuff in their youth, at least the mammalian forms. So like activity of whatever kind, that could be like hunting prey, that could be like play fighting with each other, interaction, like maybe touch, whether that's from other members of their species for like comfort and maternal care and nurturing, or from human to animal. So sleep, I see sleep for sure. Food and sleep, I mean, those are necessary for the survival of an animal, and that's why nature equips us with a reward mechanism for doing those things. We all understand, and you can relate, obviously, to the pleasures of eating and the pleasures of rest. Is there nothing else that an animal can enjoy? I mean, that's a pretty good list that we have there. Food, activity, touch, sleep. There's sex, I think. Don't you agree with that? I mean, because the animal has to be given a reward mechanism that induces it to want to reproduce for the survival of the species. So evolutionarily, like, there's pleasure centers that are activated in the brain when the animal has sex or does something that reproduces. So I would say that's also in the mix. Now, we'll come back to this in a moment, but we're going to switch over to the higher side of the divider now. Well, they do it to mate, yeah, but do you think it makes them, like, it's unpleasant? I mean, it depends, I guess. It depends on the species and it depends on the case, but we are not so much different than those animals physiologically that we should expect that, like, for example, the concept of pleasure through sex is unique to only human beings. Now, if you mean sex that's not done for the sake of reproduction, yeah, we're the only animals that have created contraceptives, but there are some isolated cases in nature of animals that seem to have sex during periods of time where they're not fertile, like the case of dolphins and some bonobo monkeys, and maybe you've heard the case of turtles, who I'm not aware of, but I'm inclined to agree. Nonetheless, I'm not making the argument that they have casual sex with like contraceptives, but just the act of sex itself is something that induces pleasure, which brings them some motivation to mate. It's not unlike the experience of a human orgasm, which sort of facilitates a desire to mate. But besides that, we're going now to this side. Higher pleasures. Higher pleasures. Now I'm asking you about what are some things that are sources of pleasure, but that animals can't enjoy, that only human beings can enjoy. So think of some sources of pleasure that only us human beings could enjoy. Sierra, you say money. Let me get back to that. But maybe like finance or something, like investment and like making money off of whatever you've done in the past. Like the whole concept of finance and investment is an alien concept to animals, since they don't have the idea of purchasing and monetary systems. So I mean, but I was not going to put it up there as the first thing, because money in itself is not really the thing that's pleasurable. It's the things that you do with the money. So I think a more pointed answer could be given. Music, for sure. So to be able to appreciate music or to play a musical instrument, of course, this is unique to the human race. It takes the abstract appreciation of sound and melody. So that's one thing. Reading, good. Literature and all forms of language. Being able to read, being able to talk, being able to transmit recorded history from one generation to the next. That's a pleasure that's only available to the human beings, because we're the only things that have language. The arts, yeah, so all of the various arts. And I like, Andrea, how you've listed some of the cases: writing, poetry, painting, photography, dance. Gary, the word think is just too basic. I mean, they can think. I don't know if they're thinking about anything interesting. They might not be reflecting on philosophy or whatever. But all academic subjects, whether it's philosophy, history, science, math, you name it. Shopping, I guess it's something we can put over here into the realm of the finance category. I mean, animals might like to own or to have the things that some of us buy with the money that we shop with. I don't know, like if you buy a cat condo for a cat, it would like the condo. It wouldn't be able to buy it itself. Saving lives, medical field. Well, there's isolated cases of animals sacrificing their life for their offspring. It's not unprecedented in nature. But yeah, if you mean like the highly specialized work of physicians and medics, yes, that's definitely something that they can't touch. So I would say medicine and those things. So, you know, we could go on and on and on. But the kinds of things that are on the higher side of the list are the things that make us humans, things that separate us from the animals. Now, can we and do we enjoy many of the items on the lower? Yes, of course. But unlike animals, we're not limited to that. We can read, we can study, we can think about physics, the universe, the history of mankind, what will happen in the future, the production of material culture, art, and so forth. So what is Mill going to say then to his critic, who said this is a theory fit for swine? His response is this. He says, well, I did say in my theory that we should be promoting and pursuing happiness to the maximum extent, and that the right action is whatever will create the most happiness for the greatest number of people. Now, the problem, according to Mill, is that his critic seems to think that when he says happiness or pleasure, that he must be meaning only what kind. The critic misinterprets Mill's theory, says Mill, by assuming that when he mentions happiness and pleasure, that he is only thinking of, tell me, which kind? For someone to say this is a theory fit for swine, they must hear the word pleasure and immediately they just start thinking about, like, can you tell me? The whole point of my demonstration, yeah, the lower ones, right? So he says the critic has a wrong understanding of what kinds of pleasures that humans can enjoy. It's as if the critic is saying that you tell me to live the life of a swine by only consuming my time with the pursuit of these kinds of things. And if that was the way that pleasure was defined, then he says, okay, well, it would be a fair criticism. But in fact, he says, when you really step back and think about it, human beings have access to more than the lower pleasures of animals. So it would be misrepresenting his view to say that in the pursuit of all the pleasures we can enjoy, that we should, in fact, he goes further. He says these higher pleasures are so much greater and more valuable than the lower ones that they matter more and they're more important. They receive greater weight than the lower pleasures do. So much so that he thinks, and he argues this, that any human person would rather have a lower quantity, like, so even if a person could have all the lower pleasures, but was not allowed to have the higher pleasures, they would never choose to do that. So he says nobody that's really rational would trade their situation as a human being for a more fully satisfied life of a pig, okay? That's actually a famous quote of Mill, and I'm gonna write that quote up here, which will kind of cap off the reference and analysis to this objection. So the quote is that it is better to be an unsatisfied human than a fully satisfied pig or non-human animal of another kind. The reason for that is because even if a pig has everything that it wants and is fully satisfied, it's got all the food, all the space, all the activity, you know, sexual activity and room to roam around and roll in the mud and be in the sun, even if it's a fully satisfied pig living its best life, that's still an inferior quality of life to an unsatisfied, complex existence of a human being like us. And the reason he gives is because the higher pleasures that we only can touch are of such greater value that they overwhelm the quality of life of lower animals, even when they have all their lower pleasures fully satisfied. So I'll read the quote. It's one of the quotes that sticks out from Mill that people often mention. He says, I'm getting the part here. Somewhere on page 79, so I'm just going to dig around and find it here. Oh yeah, so on actually 78, left side, he says this. It is an unquestionable fact that those who are equally acquainted with and equally capable of appreciating and enjoying both give a most marked preference to the manner of existence which employs their higher faculties. Few human creatures would consent to be changed into any of the lower animals, even if they had a promise of the fullest allowances of a beast's pleasures. No intelligent human being would consent to be a fool. No instructed person would be an ignoramus. No person of feeling and conscience would be selfish and base, even though they should be persuaded that the fool, the dunce, or the rascal is better satisfied with his lot than they are with theirs. And there's the key quote. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a satisfied pig. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a satisfied fool. And if the fool or the pig are of a different opinion, it is because they only know their own side of the question. The other party to the comparison knows both sides. So what he's saying there is that this criticism that this is a theory fit for swine is off base, because it's not for swine, it's for people. It says to maximize pleasure, yes, but it's not saying just to seek and promote the lower pleasures, which is what the critics seem to misunderstand. As it's correctly understood, it tells us to maximize all pleasures that humans are capable of experiencing, but especially, and with greater emphasis on, the higher pleasures. They're so much greater in value, according to him, that we would prefer our situation in life, even if we could have a more fully satisfied existence, but have to be a lower animal. Now, I know probably some of you guys who either have pets or have spent some time with animals have had that experience, which I know I've had, where you see the animal relaxing and living just so easily, being fed and catered to and playing with no obligations or worries. And you might look at them and say, wow, you know, I really wish that was me. How easy that would be to live the uncomplicated, easy life of a house pet. But when we say that, what Mill thinks is that we're not really being serious with ourselves. If you want to be really honest and think about it, no, you would never ever trade your situation for the life of a pig or a dog or a cat or any other animal that's not a human, because think of what you'd be giving up. Maybe you would have a less complicated life where you wouldn't have to think about all the academic subjects and philosophy and the future course of mankind and have to make your way in the world and learn a lot of stuff. But at the same time, you would not be able to enjoy any of those things either. You wouldn't be able to read, you wouldn't be able to speak, you wouldn't be able to contemplate the future or know about history and the past. So our lives are much more rich and enjoyable, even though they are somewhat more complicated because of our higher faculty of thought and intelligence. So again, let's talk about the whole criticism and the comeback that Mill gave. The critic said this is a theory fit for swine because all you're saying is live a life where you pursue pleasure to the most extent. But pleasure is something that's more fitting for animals than people. We're better than that, and we should try to do something more smart and rational than just seek out pleasure. But Mill comes back and says, wait a minute, I didn't say lower pleasures necessarily. When I say that we should pursue all pleasures, and that's the goal of ethics, I mean both lower and higher, but especially the higher ones, which are so much greater in value that no reasonable person would trade their situation for the situation of a more fully satisfied lower animal, okay? I mean, it's kind of cool being a human, right? I mean, here we are, we're human beings, we're the greatest things on this planet, and maybe in the whole universe, as far as we know, right? Nothing else in the whole world, and maybe nothing else anywhere in the whole universe can think these thoughts, can have these discussions, can study these topics, and engage and create technology, art, science, religion, literature. So we have very, very unique and interesting existences as humans, and he thinks that the pleasures that we're capable of pursuing are not bestial necessarily, not subhuman, and therefore not like base and worthless. Okay, so that's one major criticism, and there's Miller's response. But I wanted to quickly mention a few more criticisms, because I think that this one about the theory fit for swine is not the most deep and difficult criticism that the theory has to face. I actually think that these others that we're about to talk about are much more troubling for the theory, okay? So let's try and get into that. Another possible criticism, so we're still dealing with objections. You can also say that the theory is too demanding. Too demanding. Now let's try and get that understood. Why do you think, what is it about this theory that would perhaps place someone, place a burden on someone? In what type of situation would a person feel like this theory is imposing demands on me that are maybe even demands that are too much for me to realistically accept. What is it about the theory that places a demand on a person if what type of situation unfolds? Well, good, Andrea, you say it's hard to make everyone happy. Yes. So you would make one aspect of the demandingness would be that you could perhaps say, I'm constantly now being required in every situation to take a measure of the greater good and what's the most happiness for all that I could achieve with each action. Maybe that is placing you under too much of a constant requirement to think about everyone's interests. So you could argue that that's pretty demanding. Also, let's see, Gary, say want too much, putting everyone before yourself. Yes, this is all definitely along the right lines. Let me say it this way. In a situation in utilitarian ethics where there's something that you most prefer, but it's not going to generate the most overall happiness, what should you do? If there's something that you prefer, but it's kind of outweighed by a different action that creates more happiness for everybody else, then the individual who's the utilitarian would be obligated to do what? Go with what they want or go with what creates more happiness? In that case, do you get what you want or do you have to take one for the team? Do you know what I'm asking? Suppose you're in a situation where you want to do something and there's one thing that you prefer that will please you the most, but it's inconsistent, it's incompatible with a different action that creates more happiness for everyone else. In that type of situation, what does the theory ask you to do? So we've talked about the point that you have to constantly be thinking about everyone's interests and how to act in a way that leads to their best interest. Yeah, taking one for the team is what you'd have to do there. So like in the pizza case, it's a trivial case, right? But when we mention that, in all the scenarios that we gave, it seems like most of the people that are there are not necessarily getting their favorite choice because the thing that generates the most utility for everybody is not necessarily the individual's preference. Now, that might seem like it's not too bad if all you got to do to sacrifice is to concede that there's a different type of pizza that you're going to have to eat. In situations like that, you might just think, well, okay, fair enough, though, because there's a number of us here. I'm not the only one, and my interests aren't the only ones that are important. You've been in that situation, I'm sure, too. Be they group order, and what you'd most like is not to the taste of the others there. So in that situation, if you're utilitarian, you don't demand that you get your way, you don't refuse to participate, but you just go along for the sake of the greater good and what makes more people overall create more happiness. But it might get to be too demanding when there's more important stuff on the line than just pizza toppings. And that's the thing, there's really no limit here to what you should be asked to sacrifice according to the theory. So, for example, say that you are in a position where you can save on, okay, so there's two burning buildings. There's two buildings on fire. There's like a wildfire that's passing around. And you are out and you're safe, but you see that here's one house to your left where there's people inside and it's on fire and they can't seem to get out and they're crying for anybody to come and just prop the door open so they can escape, which you could do. But there's another house over here to your right that's got the same situation. There's people over there that are screaming and hollering, and their door could be propped open by you, the passerby. Now, as a utilitarian, first of all, there's no way that you could say, well, I'm not going to get involved because it's not my house. If you have the ability to do it and it poses no risk to you, then preventing the death of some of these people is going to create more total happiness than ignoring the situation. But now I'm going to add a little twist. Suppose that over here to the left, who's in that house? It is a dear loved one of yours, okay? So it could be fill in the blank, your mom, your sister, brother, best friend, wife, husband. But that's somebody who you really love over there, okay? But it's just one person. Now over here to the right, in the other house, it's a big family with a bunch of people over at their house. Maybe there's like 20 people over there. And they're all otherwise healthy, happy, productive human beings. So you got a choice. Let's say I'm putting you in what's called a forced choice scenario. You can only take one of the two options, perhaps because the flames will overtake the other house by the time that you've rescued the members of one. Now, if the house on the left is a dear loved one, but it's just one person, and the house on the right is a bunch of anonymous, unknown people, but there's 20 of them, what do you think utilitarianism says that you should do now with this limited time and only one option that's open to you? The right thing to do, the moral obligation, is to save the larger group. because it's just more people. And if one person dies who you love, that's a terrible thing, and it's going to cause their life to end, and it's also going to cause you a lot of pain. But looking at the other house, there's so many more people that are going to die, and so many more connections that others have formed to them, that it's going to create a much more negative human impact in terms of total happiness that is deprived or eliminated. Now, you might hear the situation and think, well, duty calls, I guess, it's the greater good. But many people would argue that in this situation, that is just too much a burden for us to realistically be expected to live up to. Because we would have to disconnect ourselves from our feelings of attachment, our bonds, and our feelings of loyalty to some who we have favored and others who we don't know as well. In utilitarian ethics, though, it doesn't matter who it is whose happiness has been maximized. It's not the identity of the person. So it doesn't say maximize happiness for the people closest to you who are your friends and family. It says maximize overall human happiness, period. So in situations like this, the utilitarian theory seems to compel the person or morally obligate them to do something which fundamentally strikes against their sense of love and attachment to the one that they're much closer to. Now let me see some of these comments here. Go for the most people, choose a 20, it's more people, yes. On my way to save my bestie, haha. That's one person compared to 20. It's sad, but Alexander, you say save both, but it's a possible scenario where you can't save both. And so suppose that time is short and death is imminent on one of these two sides. The utilitarian would say you got to go for the bigger group. Now, some of us might hear that and think, well, as much as that would be difficult, it kind of would be the right thing because that's human life and there's so much more there to save. But I think that the general reaction of most others is going to be that this is where the theory has to give, because it is just too unrealistic to expect people to discharge these moral obligations that they're being claimed if it requires us in some situations to forsake bonds of loyalty, partiality, familiarity that we've established. So too demanding. Not only would you have to always be thinking about what's best for all, you'd also have to make choices that don't necessarily align with your own preferences, including in cases where you're required to help a larger share of unknown persons, right? Okay, and then one more is this. This is the one that I think is the biggest problem of all. If you're trying to find one thing, at least in my opinion, that causes doubt about whether this is a good moral theory or the correct moral theory, it's this type of objection that I find to be the most significant. And it is the idea that no action is absolutely forbidden in principle. Okay, so let's see if you can give me some straightforward information about this theory right now that we're learning. According to utilitarian ethics, this is a simple yes or no question. Is it always wrong? I'll start small. Is it always wrong to lie? In utilitarianism, is it always wrong to lie or not? Why or why not? Well, first let's get the answer. Is it wrong or not to always lie? Is it always wrong to lie in utilitarian ethics? From this moral theory, good, Brooklyn, and that's right. It's not always wrong to lie. So who knows this? In what type of situation would the utilitarian say, actually, you're obligated to lie? In what type of scenario would lying become an obligation according to this theory? If what? If the lie would let's see, well, you can tell me. What type of situation would have to result in order for a lie to be claimed as the right thing to do, based on utilitarian ethics? Okay, so you say to save a life, but that's almost overly specific because it doesn't necessarily only need to involve life and death scenarios. It's just in any situation where the telling of the lie will create more happiness than telling the truth, okay? Now, in some cases, you might think, well, that's fair, because I can actually understand that sometimes being a little dishonest, if it's not too important, could be, all things considered, the right thing to do. Like what if somebody made a meal, this is like pre-pandemic talk in a way, but like suppose there's a potluck or whatever, and one person, you guys know what potluck is, everyone brings their own meal. And one person comes in and they told you, I worked really hard on this. This is like my favorite thing to cook. I'm so glad I could bring it, right? What did you think about it? Now, earlier, you're trying to eat it and you're like, this is the most disgusting thing. This is horrifying. This meal is straight gross. I'm gagging on this thing. But then you're talking to the person that made it, that's all happy to talk to you. Now, what do you think? If you tell them the truth, what's the truth? That was a disgusting meal and you need to stop cooking. That's the truth that you really believe. But, if you say that to them, that's going to hurt their feelings. And if you tell them a little white lie, oh, it was great. Actually, delicious. You're a great cook. Now, you're not saying what you think is true. So you're not telling the truth, but it's going to make more happiness than telling the truth. So in that case, utilitarianism says, go ahead, lie, because it's better to create more happiness rather than less. But where does it end? It's like, well, what if you're cheating on your partner and you're married and all that? If they find out that you're cheating, it's going to crush them. It's going to damage their feelings and it's going to hurt them a lot. And if they never find out about it, well, they'll continue being happy. So, in that case, what is it a good thing for us to just continue to behave in these sort of clandestine ways against the relationship and its, the integrity of the relationship, because it creates more total happiness? But that's lying. Some of you might not be too impressed by that. You might be like, well, sometimes lying isn't that bad. Well, let's go up another level. What about stealing? Is it always wrong to steal according to utilitarian ethics? Yes or no? Is it always wrong to steal according to this theory? Yeah, we can agree about the cheating for sure. But, the point is that if we license the principle that sometimes lies are permitted because they create more happiness, how can that principle be applied in a way that doesn't contrast with our moral intuitions? Now, on the other hand, I just talked about stealing. I see you guys saying, yeah, that it depends. It does depend. It depends on what? Whether the act of theft will create more total happiness than having declined to steal. And we can obviously imagine scenarios like Robin Hood type scenarios where you steal something from really wealthy people that don't even need it, and you give the money to poor people that are like really struggling. Maybe the wealthy folks who've had that stuff stolen don't even realize that it was taken because they've got millions and millions more dollars. But taking people have a lot which secures them for a long time. Now, that would, I would argue, probably be wrong. After a while, there's no respect for the concept of property, but utilitarianism cannot afford to say that because it would contradict the principle that you should always act in a way that creates the most total utility. So like if you're at like a wealthy person's house party and you saw that they had like a really expensive piece of jewelry that you could take from them, but they got like 10 of those and they don't even notice that it's missing. Now you go and you sell it on the black market and you've got $1 million and you give it to cancer research. Now you saved a bunch of human lives and this person doesn't even know the wiser. But that, according to utilitarianism, you can't really say why that's wrong. But many people will have a deep feeling that that still is wrong, despite the fact that it might create more utility. Like maybe there's something more in the ethical life that we live than just trying to maximize as much utility, happiness as possible. And then let's get to the real difficult, biggest one of all. According to utilitarianism, is it always wrong to kill an innocent person? Is it or not? Well, you'd argue probably that almost in every case, yes, but not in principle. We can imagine scenarios where by killing an innocent person, more happiness is derived. So like here, I'll give you a case that's exactly like that. This is a hypothetical scenario which is often used to try and undermine the theory. What are you saying yes and no to? The question was, is it always wrong to kill an innocent person? The answer is no, it's not. So here, let me give you this. No, innocent, totally innocent, Andrea. But let me give you the example, okay? And I'm not talking necessarily about a wartime scenario, but of course, that's another possibility. We can talk about that in a moment. So take the transplant scenario. We will actually refer to this scenario again in a couple weeks when we get to the trolley problem essay by Judith Thompson. This is another contemporary ethics writer in philosophy. But here's the transplant scenario. So it's a hypothetical scenario. It's a made-up scenario. But basically, so here is a set of 5 people. Okay, now what I want you to know is that these 5 people, they're all suffering from different types of like organ failure. Okay, so maybe one guy needs a heart transplant, liver, kidney, the other kidney, and another organ. I really don't know what another bodily organ is. Maybe can a person have their lung transplanted, perhaps? Okay, so anyway, there's 5 different vital organs. Each one of the 5 people here is sick, and they will die if they don't receive a transplant within a short frame of time. So let's say that they go in, for whatever reason, they go in as a group to the doctor. Here's a doctor guy. So he's seeing them, and they're talking to him. They're like, hey, can you help us with these transplants? Because we're about to die if we don't get those transplants, and we want to live. We got families. We got people who we care about. We've got a lot of hopes and dreams in the future, you know, that we have not yet accomplished. I mean, think about it if it was you, right? You don't want to die yet, so neither do these folks. They want to live. So they go to the doctor hoping that he can help them out to secure some type of organs. Now, he goes through the list of possible donors that are in the records. And, oh, I forgot to mention one thing. So as just total coincidence would have it, these 5 people all have the same blood type. And that's convenient because since they all have the same blood type and they all have different organs that they need, you would actually be able to save their lives if you just had how many healthy donors, in theory? With the same blood type of all 5 people, and the fact that they need different organs in every case, it's possible to save all 5 with how many donors that match that blood type? 1, correct. So if there's one health, well, you know, one, they're not healthy anymore, but if their organs are healthy and a donor could contribute those, then if there's 1 person with the matching blood type, then that's 1 person that could be used to save 5. But here's a little plot twist. It's a very rare blood type. Now, why is it that 5 people randomly all have the same highly rare blood type? It's called a coincidence. Okay, so that's a coincidence. Now, he's looking through the, let's say it's triple X blood, just to give you some kind of name. Triple X blood is their blood type. It's very rare, but they all have it. So he goes out into the donor lists, trying to find 1 donor who does have that matching triple X type. Okay? Now, he's looking, and he's not seeing nothing in the donor list. So he's kind of disappointed that he won't be able to help them. And he's going back over into the waiting room where they're at. And he's about to have a very tough talk where he's going to tell them, sorry, guys, but despite my best efforts and a really thorough search, I can't find a single match. And therefore, I'm afraid to say I can't help you with these organs. But just as he's about to do that, another patient comes in off the street, totally unrelated, but this guy comes in. And who is this? It's a young, healthy person. It's like you. It's a young, healthy person that's just going in for a nice, normal checkup. They don't even really have any symptoms. They're not feeling any type of way. Maybe they're just going in for, a regular physical. But that's it. So they go in, and the doctor's like, you know what? I need a minute anyway to clear my mind before I go back and speak to these folks. So I'm going to just quickly take his information down and see him for a minute. Maybe you see where this is going? So as he's talking to this guy, and he looks at his just medical chart, he notices something very interesting. Aha, this guy off the street, random young healthy person, actually, what do you think about it? What do you think he finds out about him? The doctor encounters this person off the street that's also in the hospital to get a simple physical. But yes, he identifies that this person has that very rare blood type, the triple X. So what's our doctor thinking? He's thinking this thought. Well, okay, kind of convenient coincidence. If this guy was somehow able to be the donor, then he could be that one that saves 5, So let me just talk to him. All right, so imagine this situation. Doctor sits down. He's like, hey, can I give you some coffee or something? Just take a seat. Get comfortable. I wanted to ask you some things. And this is going to be a weird conversation, but I'm just going to have to throw it out there and just be blunt with you, okay? So, look, there's 5 guys over in the next room, and they're all suffering from these different organ failures, which is tragic, and I want to save their lives. But unfortunately, they all have the same blood type, which is, on the one hand, convenient, but the thing is it's a rare blood type. So it's this hard to find triple X blood match. and I'm going looking for donors to help him. I can't find one. So anyway, here you are. You came in. It's almost like some type of divine intervention. You just walk into my office out of the blue, and I'm looking at your info, and actually, you have the same blood type. So I'm just going to throw this out there at you. Just tell me what you think. Just going to put it out there. So what do you say? Would you be okay with, like, if I took your organs from your body and gave them to those guys, and then they'll all live? Okay, now you would die. Okay, just being honest. There's no way you could survive that, because we're talking about taking out 5 of your big vital organs. But, be a hero. You're going to save 5 people's lives, and there's one of you, it's 5 of them. So, I mean, look, if you allow me to do this, it's going to be a net gain of +4. And if you don't allow me to do it, it's like -4. It's 5 dying and 1 living. Wouldn't we rather have 5 living and 1 dying? So, I mean, what do you think? Is it okay? Now, if this guy's anything like me and you, I guess, I mean, I know how you are, but if he's anything like probably most of us, what do you think would be his answer to this request? Okay, well, you know what? Like, honestly, I'm sorry, no, I can't do that. Exactly, Ricardo. That's the reaction anyone would have. Isn't that a typical, I mean, that'd have to be your reaction. You'd say something like, okay, well, I'm sorry those guys are sick, and I really feel badly for them. But you know what? I got my own life to live, and I can't just be used for no spare parts. I have a right to live, even if there's more people in the next room. My life is that important. It matters so much that I can't just be used as a way of saving other lives, even if there's more of them than me. So certainly not. Are you even a doctor? I mean, I just came here for a basic medical physical, and you're telling me to give my organs up and sacrifice my life? Hell no, no way. Okay, now look, if this doctor was like an extreme utilitarian, like to the maximum, then what should he do, or so-called, at this point in time? What's the right action, I guess, at least theoretically, for this utilitarian to take now? The doctor. Lie to who? What do you mean, Haley? No, I wasn't going for lying. But I'm not sure what the lie would be about. I'm kind of confused. But it's not too hard to say. You should just do what? Yeah, murder the man, kill this person, take his life again, and give those organs to the other 5 people. Now, if that happens, according to the theory, there's more total happiness that's been promoted, because if you didn't act that way, the result will be dead 5 people and 1 guy that's alive. And if you do act that way, there's going to be 1 dead person, 5 people alive. Now, the problem is, of course, let me ask you, do you think that that's right or wrong to do that? Just you. Would that be a wrong thing to do? Or would it not be wrong? What is your intuition? Forget the theory. Wrong. Okay, good. Yes. And I think that's the overwhelming response of almost anybody who thinks about a case like this. The problem then for the utilitarian is that it's going to be hard for the theory to justify what's really wrong, because the theory just says do whatever you got to do to maximize the most overall utility that's possible. But it doesn't place guardrails, so it doesn't say do what you have to do to get the most utility, unless you have to like violate somebody's rights, or unless you have to do something against somebody's will. It doesn't say that. It just says do whatever is necessary to generate the most overall utility for the greatest number of people. And so, of course, that leaves open the possibility that even life could be set aside for the greater good if there's a greater number of other people who could be saved. There are cases in reality where sometimes utilitarian intuitions like this seem reasonable. If you've heard about, like, I don't know, like the Donner Party, have any of you heard about that? People back in the day, they were making a journey west. They got trapped in the snowy part of the pass, couldn't go anywhere, and after a while had to make tough decisions about like cannibalizing a dead member of their party or something, which is something they would never want to do, but thought that it would be necessary to save the greater share of them. We can imagine a case maybe a little less exotic than that, where there's like a hostage scenario. Imagine if you have a hostage taker who's taken one person as a human shield, and they have a whole like room full of others that are being held under threat of an explosive being detonated unless the SWAT team meets the demands of the hostage taker. Now suppose that time is running short, and he said that he's going to blow the whole building up if these demands are not made within like the next couple minutes. And there's a sniper who has a clear shot at the hostage taker, but the only way to get that shot is to do what, you think? You follow this hypothetical? It's not even that high. I mean, real things like this have happened. So suppose the hostage taker is using the human shield, and he's also got a room full of hostages. So suppose that he can kill the hostage taker, but he has to shoot through the hostage. Now, if he does that, what's he doing? Well, the shooter, the sniper, will be killing one innocent, but because if he doesn't do it, the imminent death of all 20 is going to happen. So yet again, it's a case where the argument could be made, according to the utilitarian theory, that that's the right thing to do. And most of us probably wouldn't necessarily morally condemn that action. So it's kind of weird. Our utilitarian intuitions can kind of shift depending on the way the case is presented. In the transplant scenario, it's like overwhelming 100% everyone. You guys understand that's wrong. But the theory does not provide us with a good way to adjudicate when the utilitarian optimific act is wrong and impermissible, and when it's something that we should do. According to classical utilitarianism, it's sometimes hard to do the right thing, and it also involves actions that are generally forbidden, but in special cases can be justified. And you've talked about war, some of you guys. And yes, that's actually true, that in wartime, sometimes military plan and decisions are made with utilitarian moral principles in mind. Let me give you an example of that that's definitely real. Take World War II and the atomic bombs that the United States dropped on Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, okay? Now, historians and moral philosophers debated and still debate whether that was the right thing to do on an ethical basis. But I think the consensus of most, at least US historians and academics, is that it was justified, even though it killed a lot of people. Now, what do you think could possibly be the moral justification for the dropping of those bombs on Japan, if there is one? Moral justification, not tactical justification, like, oh, it's dominating or something. Morally justified. Why would someone be able to at least theoretically argue that that was just and that was even obligatory? What do you think could be the argument given? I'm not saying I agree with that at all, but like, what would be a person's argument if they thought that that was a good moral action, despite the huge loss of life? What do you think? I mean, we're talking utilitarian talk, so it shouldn't be that hard to understand. What could have been the justification offered along utilitarian lines? Okay, good, Dewey, that the war ended. Yes. So one could argue, and in fact this is the argument that most gave, that if we had not dropped those weapons, then we would have spared the lives of the people who were killed by the bombs, but at the cost of allowing the war to continue on indefinitely long. So if the war were not to have been short-circuited by the detonation of these powerful weapons, then it could have carried on for 5, 10, 15 years with a dedicated enemy that refuses to surrender. And you could argue that that might have led to even greater loss of life on both sides in the long run of time than the substantial loss of life, but which also resulted in the end of the conflict that the bombs caused. So, you know, that just shows you that in utilitarianism, things that we really value and care about, like life, can be, in a way, sacrificed for an even more beneficial outcome that's more conducive to the saving of lives overall. So these kind of, sometimes they're called necessary evils or whatever, that are done in war, are justified along utilitarian moral principles. So look, if you're a person who finds fault with those aspects of the theory, and probably it's a reasonable reaction to have, then you might find better favor with the next ethical system that we're going to develop as we return on Tuesday. So the major rival to utilitarian ethics is Kantian ethics. That's the viewpoint and moral philosophy of Immanuel Kant. And to anybody who thought this transplant scenario, if that is even possibly considered moral, then the theory has to be wrong, then you'll be probably a little bit more favorable to the next account, which would have a completely different reaction to the situation here. In Kantian ethics, every single human being's life has to be treated as an end in itself and never as a means to an end. So it's wrong in principle to kill, even if you saved, you know, indefinitely many people, according to Kant, because you cannot do such a thing with a good will. So this is a way different approach, but some people prefer the utilitarian account. You know, utilitarianism, some people argue, is kind of like it offers flexibility in situations where and unsavory or undesirable action is the only action that can mitigate the overall loss of life or loss of happiness. So some people like the flexibility that it affords. Like, well, it can't say that it's unconditionally wrong to lie or unconditionally wrong to kill. You know, the utilitarian will say it depends on the case. It depends on the possible outcomes in comparison with alternatives to that action. So some people like that, but I find that it definitely grates against anybody's feeling that there are very strong human rights that are absolute and that should never be violated. If you have that type of feeling, then maybe utilitarianism isn't your preference in terms of an ethical system, and you'll be happy to know that there's others. Famously, one utilitarian named Jeremy Bentham, who's like a predecessor of John Stuart Mill, he said that rights are just nonsense on stilts. I found that to be such a bad comment and quote. Like, he thinks that the concept of rights are just conventions, they're just fictions, and we prop them up on stilts to make them seem high-minded and substantial and significant, but really there's just utility calculations. How much happiness will this action generate versus other actions? But me personally, I'm a much bigger believer in the sacred sanctity of rights, and therefore there are some aspects of utilitarian theory that I find fault with. Like, I think there are some actions that should be forbidden, no matter how much utility that we could get from them. So I guess in a way, I have some of the same feelings of those who criticize the theory. But I didn't think that the theory fit for swine was the most fatal criticism of the theory, nor even did I think that the idea that it's too demanding was the biggest problem. This thing about how no action is absolutely ruled out or off the table, as it were, is the one that disturbs me the most. Because I think that there have to be some kind of fundamentally wrong actions that should never be considered permitted or even obligatory, regardless of the payoff of doing so, even if that payoff is in terms of general human happiness and not just my own selfish interests or whatever. Okay. Well, any questions about the material today or anything else? Just understand that on Tuesday, the first essays are due. You'll be able to just send me your essay through an email attachment anytime before 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday. A couple students have asked me to give a few comments, and I'll try to do that over the weekend if there's anyone else that has a draft they would want me to look at. The only thing I ask is that it would come for that teaching day, and I'll be kind of running out of time for the Tuesday. Too demanding? What is too demanding? My schedule? Or are you referring to the objection? Sometimes attempts at humor get lost in these text-based interactions, but I'll just take it as a nice joke. Oh, yes. Well, yeah, there are objections. So objections include that it's a theory fit for swine, that it's too demanding because we would have to sacrifice even bonds of loyalty and partiality if the greater good required it. We would also have to be constantly calculating everyone's preferences and never permitted to merely consider our own interests in isolation. And then the third big one is that no action is totally ruled out. Not stealing, not lying, and in at least theoretically conceivable cases, not killing. Now, a utilitarian in response to this transplant scenario, I mean, I know what they'll say. They'll say, like, look, first of all, this is a totally made-up scenario. It's not something that's going to happen. So utilitarianism is pretty effective and realistic in real situations that really happen. Sure, it's theoretically possible that you could be in this case where there's 2 burning buildings, but is that really going to happen? So some would argue that although these counterexamples are possible to construct and to develop, that they're not the mainstay of actual realistic scenarios that we find ourselves in life. So I can imagine a utilitarian saying, if these are the scenarios in which my theory fails to give the right answer, they're just so marginal and unrealistic as to be insignificant. And then maybe you could also argue that they are canceled out and balanced out by the fact that there are other situations where the utilitarian seems to give us the answer we want. Like, if it's always absolutely wrong to kill, then I guess you can't even kill somebody to save a bunch of lives in a hostage scenario. And so your intuitions are going to kind of be yours to make a judgment about. I think there's a little subject relativity in the perspective that one has about how this theory is accurate or not. Like, if you're one of the 5 people, you might be like, it's not really wrong for 5 of us to be saved by 1. I mean, that's 5 of us. If you're the one guy, you're going to be like, no, my rights are absolute. So sometimes maybe we can betray a little lack of consistency depending on our placement in a given scenario. If you're one of the hostages in the hostage scenario, you're hoping the sniper will take the shot. If you're the human shield, you're hoping that he'll respect the absolute sacred nature of human life and would just rather refrain from doing that and let the consequences be what they may. So let's try to think a little bit about these concepts and apply them if we want in our lives. The next thing, though, that we will do is have a rival theory to match against this. So for those that found fault with this theory, you'll get another look at something different. Okay, guys, so nothing else from me? Questions? No? Thanks then, guys. All right, have a great weekend. I really appreciate your attendance as always. Make sure to just keep showing up, and I'll be with you on Tuesday. And let me know if you have anything that you need over the weekend by email. I'll be checking my messages every day. So, okay then, have a great one, and take care. I'll see you next time.